Winter presses its palm against the window, and the glass, what little there is of it, blooms with breath. In a stone cottage that has learned the art of holding its heat, a candle stutters to attention. The wick coughs, the flame steadies, and shadows kneel along the walls like listeners. This is where our story begins. Not in a throne room, not in a chronicle penned in bright inks, but in a room, the colour of unslept dreams, where a woman sits at a table rubbed smooth by years of elbows and prayers. The room is ordinary. That is its power. An iron hook holds a kettle. The hearth yawns red. A basket of flax waits in the corner with the patience of work. So much of medieval life lived at this small scale. The distance between a ladle and a mouth. The time it takes a log to surrender, to ash the brief mercy of warmth on numb fingers. The candle is not merely light, it is permission. Under its modest authority, a life can be thought about for a while. Church bells roll over the village like weather. They are clocks, summons, and grammar. At dawn, wake. At noon, pause. At dusk, return. Tonight their sound is softened by snow and the muscles of sleep. A dog rearranges itself in the corridor. Someone somewhere tightens a shutter against the wind and calls that small victory Providence. The night answers with a draught under the door and the common theology of cold whatever you have. Share it or burn it. Our interest is not the king's justice, but the private arithmetic of survival, especially as it was asked of women. The official record, the charters, sermons, edicts, speaks in the language of power. It enumerates what may be done to a woman, on behalf of a woman, in place of a woman. It is strangely quiet about what a woman knows when the midwife nods and closes the door, when the pantry thins, when the priest's words pick up the weight of habit and begin to sound like law. This silence is not empty. It is crowded with decisions, with endurance, with the nimble ethics of getting through another week. In the cottage, the woman reaches for a quill. Not every woman could write, and yet writing happens through her hands all the same. The ledger of chores, the measured pinch of herbs, the quiet edits to a family's future negotiated in the market and the kitchen. Knowledge moves in other ways by touch, by repetition, by stories that tie a knot in the mind where a sentence would go if sentences were allowed. Still imagine a quill, because the mind wants a witness, and the flame wants something to bless besides smoke. The page she opens is not blank. It has been written on for centuries by theologies and customs by merchant contracts, and folk songs by glances, exchanged in doorways when announcements come from men with clean hands. The ink beneath our ink says women are born nearer the earth than heaven. Women are vessels. Women are property with duties attached. Women are danger, if unowned, holy, if contained. This old script is not invincible, but it is stubborn like winter, and it teaches its lessons early. Listen to the house. Floorboards deliver a report from the next room, a child, turning in sleep, the simple genius of breath warmed against wool. The ladle knocks the pot with the tempered music of enough for tonight. Outside snow corrects the ruts in the lane, making everything briefly equal. The moon treads its pale road. Inside, we count what can be counted candles left. The length of the log, the eggs, the hens might concede if morning is kind. And we measure what cannot, the distance between duty and self, the cost of a word spoken aloud. The church has opinions about the body, and the body must live with them. Flesh is translated into parable. Pain acquires a sheen of meaning, not chosen by the one who bears it. Desire is named as risk, comfort as temptation. A woman's calendar is liturgical even when no feast is kept blood milk fever bone, the vigil of waiting the octave of grief. Yet beneath the doctrine, there is a practical physics learned at the price of apprenticeship to life. She knows how to read the colour of a newborn's cry. She knows which herb whispers stay to a failing appetite. She knows when the gossip in the lane is a weather vane for danger. There are more kinds of learning than the town scribe can catalogue. Women keep a curriculum of thresholds, doorways, bedsides, grave edges. They learn which men are safest when sober, which when drunk, which officials will barter mercy for a loaf, which for a secret. They memorize the room what to move if a labour turns, where a stool goes so weight becomes bearable, the one prayer that steadies a hand when steady hands are demanded. The great events war, famine, plague arrive like storms, but survival is a craft practiced between storms, often without applause. We will be told later that some of what they did was witchcraft. We will be told earlier that some of what they suffered was natural. Words patrol borders. We will follow the contraband. The small acts that cross anyway a recipe for easing fever. A shrewd bargain that keeps a daughter from an unwanted door, the arrangement of women's bodies around a bed, so that one person's pain is held by many. The candle lowers itself inch by inch, swallowing its own ladder of wax. The woman turns the page. What we call history is usually the result of public gestures, proclamations, nailed to wood treaties, knuckled into wax names, trained to sit beside titles. What we will call this is different. It is history practiced under the discipline of quiet. It is life built with materials. Official language considers insufficient hands, breath, repetition, humour, leveraged against dread. It is 1,000 small competencies braided into the day so tightly that only absence reveals them. Look again at the table. A scar where a knife slipped, a scorch where a bowl forgot itself, stains the shape of unanswerable questions. This is the archive. We read it with care. There will be time for doctrine, for law, for the medical theories that tracked women's bodies like planets, but did not ask the women where they were going. There will be a chapter on marriage, where a ring is both ornament and lock. A chapter on childbed, where courage looks like exhaustion. A chapter on holiness, where obedience is mistaken for virtue because the right witnesses were present. There will be a night beside a threshold where accusations bloom like frost. For now we let the candle do its work. The flame is a tutor in proportion. It shows enough to move the hand, not enough to banish doubt. Shadows are not errors, they are part of the sentence. The room breathes with the same rhythm as the person within it, gather, spend, gather, spend. Outside, the village rehearses its silence, saving the noise for morning. Inside, we grant ourselves the luxury rarely afforded in these records. We will pause and we will look closely. This is not a story about exceptional people, though we will meet some. It is a story about ordinary magnitude, the way dignity persists at low temperatures, the way a life can be both constrained and vast, depending on where you stand in the room. We begin here because beginnings matter. They teach us how to listen. The candle falters, recovers, falters again. Snow writes its soft grammar on the world beyond the door. We lift the quill. We address the centuries with a simple correction. The silence was never empty. It was waiting to be heard. At dawn, the village opens like a hand. Frost threads the hedges. The rooster conducts a choir of buckets, doors, and early feet. In one cottage, a girl is born. The midwife has wrapped the room in method water, warmed in a blackened pot linens, folded like quiet intentions, a sprig of rue pinned above the lintel because someone's grandmother insisted it helped. Outside, the well remembers every winter. Inside, a woman learns again that breath comes as a bargain, first for herself, then for the small stranger she has carried across the dark. The child arrives with the solemnity of any new citizen of the world. Damp hair, eyes narrowed against the contract of light, a cry that is both protest and proof. The midwife reads the cry the way a clerk reads a seal, this pitch, this strength, this colour in the lips, and nods to the room. There will be time later for omens. For now, there is the practical sacrament of warmth, a fire coaxed from last night's embers, a cloth rubbed over tiny limbs until anger becomes appetite. When the father asks, "Is it well?" he is for a moment like every father who has asked that question, since language learned to speak in plurals. When the midwife answers, "She is well," the room rearranges itself. Love does not change. It is immediate and animal, the body's relief perched on the mother's face. But the mathematics around love alters like light. A boy might promise labour a shield against the years when shoulders stiffen. A girl promises other kinds of numbers, dowry alliance, the invisible accounts kept by families who must turn relationships into winter insurance. The father makes a second nod, first to health, then to the arithmetic that children impose, and steps outside to tell the waiting yard that the world has acquired a daughter. News is a migratory weather. It crosses fences by way of milk pails and gossip. By afternoon, the church will have a whisper, ready bring her to the font before the week is out. The soul must be assigned to its right address. The priest will ask for a name, and say a name already in his book Mary Agnes Margaret Ann. Saints are a kind of fence too, and the village likes its boundaries tidy. The mother, still tender at the edges of the world, tries on each name in her mouth, like a promise she will have to keep. A girl is educated early, and not always by books. Her first tutors are routine and inference. She learns that the hearth is a clock that runs on patience, that bread has moods and will sulk if handled coldly, that a floor swept in the right direction keeps crumbs from making enemies with drafts. She learns the grammar of adults, how a voice shortens when money is thin, how a cough is rehearsed before it becomes confession, how a mother's smile can mean yes, but not today. She will be taught catechism later. For now she memorizes the catechism of rooms, what goes where, when to touch, when to wait. By 7, she has a small portfolio of competence. She knows how to carry water without gifting half of it to the path, how to nurse a fire past stubbornness, how to read the weather on a doorstep's damp. The village repays competence with expectation. A girl who does things well discovers that well is a floor that keeps rising. Praise comes with hooks. You have good hands, someone says, meaning. May those hands always be busy. Such a careful child, someone says, meaning caution is your destiny. No one means harm. Custom is a river that believes it is a road. There is schooling sometimes. In towns whither generous monk girls tuck themselves into the margins of lessons meant for boys and catch the alphabet's crumbs. In other places, letters are an expensive spice, and the family cannot afford flavour they cannot eat. Even then there are texts. The girl learns to read the bodies in her house, her mother's shoulders hunched over a basin, her father's thumb worrying the same knot in the table's edge each night, the way a brother refuses to meet her eye after a scolding, because shame wants to be alone. She learns to estimate distance by footfall, how far to the market, how far to the neighbour who will lend salt, and to estimate danger by silence. The church speaks to her in the second person plural, even when she is alone, yea. It tells her about Eve who reached. It tells her about Mary who consented. It builds a small corridor and asks her to walk it no reaching, only consenting. She is told that obedience is a key that fits heaven's lock, that modesty is a thread that keeps the body from unravelling into scandal, that patience is a ladder whose top is invisible but guaranteed. Much of this instruction is sincere. Much of it is useful in a culture where women survive by being mistaken for furniture until they are needed then for miracles, when they do what furniture cannot. When the girl bleeds for the first time, the world offers new arithmetic again. The midwife arrives with herbs and privacy. The talk is not clinical, it is infrastructural. Here is how fabric must be folded, how vinegar can quiet a smell, that rancor notices how work can be arranged, so that pain walks at your pace instead of forcing you to walk at its. The church offers its layers of meaning, purity, guarded, fertility, awakened, Eve whispering in a different key. But the midwife offers logistics, and logistics is a kind of mercy more immediate than doctrine. With men, knowledge often travels in lines from father to son, across a field from master to apprentice, across a bench. With women, knowledge travels in circles from mother to daughter, from neighbour to neighbour, across a threshold from the dead to the living, through recipes written in a script of stains. A circle can be a boundary. It can also be a fortification. The girl becomes a citizen of this round republic without noticing turning secrets into tools and tools into habits and habits into identity. The market sharpens her. She learns that bargaining is theatre with an abacus backstage. She learns which merchants practice charity disguised as stubbornness and which practice theft disguised as charm. She learns to weigh coins by ear. A clipped piece clinks with guilt. If she is clever, she discovers that laughter disarms suspicion better than silence, and that dignity, like salt, is best used sparingly, but daily. These are not the virtues recorded in sermons, yet they keep bread on a plate and distance between danger and the door. In some houses there is a book. The father keeps it in a chest with a pious lock and pretends numbers are modest. He writes the price of grain as if it were weather inexorable and above discussion. The girl is not meant to see. She does not read the numbers, but she reads the knuckles when they whiten, when they rest. She understands that a bad harvest writes itself into the future, like a slow illness, and that luck is a word people use when they are too tired to say neighbour. At 12, talk visits like an aunt with strong opinions. There is a family, someone says, whose roof keeps out rain. Roofs can be courtship. The boy works hard, someone adds, meaning his father does. The girl has a face. It is hers and not. The village sees in it what villagers are trained to seek: fertility, temperament, the rumour of good fortune. She sees in it a person who is asked to become a plan. Plans are not always cruel, but they are rarely curious. Still, childhood is not a uniform sentence. There are afternoons when the sun forgets to be stern and children melt the border between work and play. There are moments when the girl is simply a creature, among other creatures, a hen's negotiating politics under a cart, a cat arguing with a beam of light, a friend inventing a game that uses stones, sticks, and the law of fairness as they understand it. Joy is an unscheduled tutor. It teaches her that a body can be more than duty and that laughter is a kind of ownership. Winter returns, as it does in honest stories. The girl grows into the sort of competence that villages depend on and therefore do not apologize for exploiting. She lifts, she mends, she calculates, she yields. The parish ledger will never spell her name with admiration, but the neighbourhood's breathing relies on her like a muscle relies on its small tendons. Born into obedience, we might say, as if obedience were a room with one door. Yet she is also born into invention, the art of taking a narrow space and teaching it to hold more of her than it was designed to contain. At night, when the house has finished its chores and the fire has retired to a red opinion, the girl listens to the dark as if it were telling time. Somewhere in the village a mother sings. Somewhere a drunk rehearses tomorrow's apology. Somewhere a fox considers arguments for and against the henhouse. She lies awake at the border between herself and the version of herself that others will require. The candle, if there is one, is spared. Wax is work. She maps futures with the instrument's available breath pulse, a promise she makes to no one and everyone at once keep a small corner of the mind unbought. In the morning, she will rise into the script that waits. Scripts can be edited. That too is something. She learns not from the priest or the law, but from the midwife's hands and the market's grin and the quiet republic of women who fold resistance into competence, the way a baker folds air into bread. For now the house sleeps. Snow writes another page, the wind will later tear, and the girl, still a girl, not yet the solution to anyone else's problem, turns toward the day with the unassuming bravery that history misnames as habit. By the time the girl's plats have learnt to behave, marriage has already learned her name. It comes to the house like weather with paperwork. A cousin brings a rumour, a neighbour brings a suggestion, an uncle brings an arithmetic disguised as blessing. The doorframe measures her height against last winter's knife mark. The village measures her value against roofs, fields, and the length of a handshake between men. Betrothal is less a moment than a choreography. There are visits each carrying a different temperature. First comes the gentle survey, women appraising bread spin temper, men appraising acreage prospects, and whether another household's chaos is compatible with their own. Then the firmer talk coin set on a table, a list of what will be brought as if love were a cart. Dowry is the word that keeps everyone polite. It is a bridge made of linens, and hand-me-down copper of a cow with a good reputation of a promise that future quarrels will not be about salt. The girl sits to one side, and every sentence uses her as a preposition. If she is lucky, she has been allowed to dislike someone already, so that her eventual silence can be tallied as improvement. If she is unlucky, the man is twice her age, and has learned to wear patience like a cloak, only when bargaining. There is talk of character, his, not hers. He is steady, which means he knows the price of wheat in 3 parishes and the perils of a pretty opinion. He is God-fearing, which means he has a witness for his temper. He is well-placed, which means the house into which she will vanish has walls that currently prefer to stand. The church insists on banns, read aloud on 3 successive Sundays, a public rehearsal of fate. Names are pronounced as if they were already in stone, and the village does what villages do with information. Nod, calculate, compare. A few faces soften. Most arrange themselves into the respectful blandness of people who are relieved the chosen couple is not a problem they must solve. The girl learns that public approval can sound like rain, present impersonal, saturating everything you own. On the appointed morning, someone braids her hair with more care than usual. Cloth is smoothed a ribbon discovered from last year's better times, a borrowed brooch that has guarded more throats than memory can count. Her mother murmurs a last-minute curriculum that has been taught since women discovered their own inheritance. Listen more than you answer. Humour dulls a blade. Hide money where men forget to look. The words carry affection and surrender in the same basket. The church is smaller on wedding days. The air is filled with the politeness of people waiting to witness something they have already decided to understand. Candles approve. The priest conducts a ceremony that splices sky to floor. Vows are said in a voice that has said them to many faces. The ring is a circle that seems to promise a return to itself. The contract is a line that points away. Outside bells perform happiness on the couple's behalf. Inside a book learns 2 names at once, and the priest's hand, trained by repetition, makes them look compatible. There is bread always, and sometimes music. There are games in which the village pretends it is the author of this new household loud teasing, a mock wrestling over the threshold jokes about who will rule and who will reign. The girl smiles, which is the cheapest currency and the most demanded. She practices the art she will need for the rest of her life, lending expressions to occasions. What she truly feels is kept like a secret herb, useful and not for guests. That night the bed is a stage with curtains made of expectation. Curtains are not privacy, they are simply what people agree to look at. Consummation is discussed in the language of proof and property proof, that the contract has moved from paper to blood property that can now be named without embarrassment. There are houses where laughter fills this room and tenderness learns new grammar. There are houses where tenderness is something the couple will have to invent later if they are brave. There are houses where invention is not a permitted sport. None of this is written in the parish register. In the morning, she wakes into the job for which the ceremony was merely an orientation. Marriage as practiced here is a management position without pay. She audits larders and avoids insult in the same motion. She learns the temperament of the oven and of the man who calls it his. She becomes the calendar that keeps the house honest. This many candles, left this many sacks before the month. This twice-weekly theatre of civility, with a neighbour whose fence wants to migrate. The vocabulary of care expands broth for a cough vinegar, for a stain tacked, for a visitor who will not leave, even when the fire has announced closing time. The law by which we mean the tangle of customs, clerks, and men with stamps recognises her chiefly as an attachment. Her capacity to contract is borrowed from her husband the way a cloak is borrowed from a peg available, if he allows it and if weather insists. If she is injured, compensation is negotiated at a height slightly above her head. If she is struck, a priest may suggest that forbearance breeds a better man the way soaking beans breeds soup. If she is cherished, it is often because both households remember a famine and are grateful for the beggar's trick of holding on with two hands. There is the marriage debt, a phrase like a locked coffer. It means that a husband may summon her body with the ringing certainty of a bell and call that summons duty. It also means in more generous households than pamphlets would admit that she can reach for his body as shelter and not be refused. Debt is a grim word for mutuality, but sometimes grim words are the keys available. The gap between doctrine and practice is the width of a bed, and couples furnish that space as they can. Dowry, which arrived with trumpets, shows its second face leverage. In good seasons, it keeps her from being dismissed as a servant with extra vowels. In bad seasons, it becomes a bill the husband presents to her patients. I paid for this. She learns the domestic politics of gratitude, when to thank, when to let thanks appear and pass like weather. She hides a coin or two because legitimacy is a vocabulary lesson delivered by hunger. The right to leave requires fare for the road. Children come as weather too. Each one rearranges the household's furniture. Sleep moves into corners. Fear becomes a routine you schedule, like laundry. The girl, now a woman, hears her mother's old curriculum in her own mouth. She repeats what was useful, revises what was cruel, invents where necessity, elbows invention into being. A quiet resistance persists in how she allocates kindness, in which secret she keeps for her daughters, and which she lends to sons as hedge against the swagger the world will rent them. The village watches her marriage the way it watches a mill pond, interested when the surface breaks, satisfied when it does not. Loneliness is not news. Neither is contentment. Both are managed in kitchens, which the chroniclers rarely visit. On feast days she stands beside the man, so that people will believe the household is a single shape. On ordinary days she is the moving part that keeps the shape from collapsing. If he grows gentler with years, some of the credit is hers, and will never be paid. If he grows stricter, some of the blame will be too. What of love? It exists here, but not in the grammar imported by troubadours. Love is a practical theology built from recurring gestures, a hand that does not strike, a silence that makes room for someone else's fear, a joke that relieves the evening of its weight, a step taken back from the edge of a quarrel because bread is in the oven and scorched bread punishes everyone. Love is a ledger with many small entries and no closing flourish. It grows like moss, quietly, usefully hard to praise without sounding foolish. Still, there are nights when the woman sits with her back to the door and lets the dark inventory the room. She could have been another person in another parish earning her bread with the same hands, but answering to a different name. She could have been no one at all, weather lost, plague, lost a rumour that never learned to walk. The thought is not regret. It is topography, a map of the country she did not choose, but has made habitable. She touches the ring. It is both a promise kept and a promise that kept her. Circles can be bracelets. They can also be zeros. She decides again to treat it as a wheel. When the bells speak from the church and the lane repeats them in puddles, she rises and sets the table for morning bowls at each place. The good knife where it will be found fast. Marriage, as the village defines it, is a transaction that never stops transacting. But inside its reckoning, there is another economy. One she manages, without ledger, the spending and saving of herself, so that in a world fond of prices, she remains stubbornly, quietly priceless. Morning gathers itself in coloured shards, slipping through the church's stained glass and laying disciplined rainbows on the flagstones. The village files in, wearing its best intentions. The air smells of tallow-cold stone and the kind of hope that has learned to sit very still. A woman enters with everyone else, but she enters differently. She crosses herself at the font, where winter's water keeps the past obedient, then finds the bench that knows the weight of her week. The priest warms his voice with the psalms, and the psalms warm the room with grammar. The service is a machine that makes time respectable. Words are braided to gestures. Gestures are braided to rules. Rules are braided to salvation. Salvation is braided to the body. This is the church's great art to speak about heaven, in a language the body cannot escape. Kneel, stand, bow, receive, fast, feast. The calendar is a theology you can chew. In Lent, the mouth learns humility. On feast days, it learns gratitude, and how quickly gratitude can be mistaken for permission. The sermon arrives like weather, with footnotes. Today's topic, Eve who reached, Mary who answered. Between those two syllables, reach and answer, the church builds a corridor and calls it womanhood. The priest is not cruel. He is sincere, which can be fiercer than cruelty. He tells the flock that women are nearer the garden where the mistake began and nearer the cradle where the repair began, and that this nearness commands a special discipline. Guard the gates, he says, meaning eyes, ears, lips, flesh. The devil takes the shortest road. The men nod, because the road the devil takes is not usually through them, at least not in public. After the dismissal, the day returns to its chores, but the sermon stays like a draught under the door. Doctrine makes itself at home in small ways. When the woman reaches for bread before others are served, the hand remembers Eve and hesitates. When she laughs too loudly at the well, a glance trims the laugh into something more becoming. When she bathes, she counts the beats between privacy and fear, as if shame were a meter. The body is not merely hers, it is a public property with a private custodian. Confession is a small theatre with thin walls. The lattice admits air and secrecy in the same measure. She kneels and learns the church's preferred vocabulary for what she feels. There are words for a glance held too long for a thought invited back, after it should have been sent away for pleasures, the mouth remembers without permission. There is less language for exhaustion, for the architecture of duty, that makes impatience into a survival tool, for the fury that has nowhere to go, and so ferments into silence. Still she speaks what can be spoken, and receives what can be received, a penance measured in prayers, a pardon measured in faith, a relief measured in tears that do not need witnesses. Fasting is supposed to unteach the body its appetites so the soul can drink without sloshing. She is good at fasting. Poverty trained her. But where men's fasting is a public instrument signed sealed witnessed hers, is domestic and hidden a negotiation between her and the pot. She takes the smaller portion and calls it piety, because the language for someone else needs this more is thin on the parish tongue. On saints' days, she allows sweetness into the house and watches it move like a tame miracle, fingers dipped and licked faces briefly lit. Joy is a sacrament unlisted in the calendar. There are relic splinters of holiness set in metal like arguments. The church holds them up and the village holds its breath. She looks and wants to believe that matter can carry mercy the way a jug carries water sturdily, reliably, without favour. She touches the reliquary's rim and feels nothing or everything or something her vocabulary cannot sort. Faith for her is not a mood, but a verb. It is the hour spent holding a neighbour's baby, while the neighbour weeps the bruise she refuses to count as an injustice, because counting will make it louder the prayer she threads between chores, so the day does not unravel. The church teaches about the marriage debt, and the teaching is old enough to look like nature. A husband may claim a wife's body, a wife may claim a husband's. In theory, it is mutual as a handshake. In practice, hands are not equal. She learns to translate debt into kindness, where she can to fold consent into the fabric of an evening, so that dignity keeps its shoes on. At confession, she calls any refusal weariness, because the confessor understands weariness and distrusts vocabulary she cannot afford to defend. Modesty is the parish's favourite arithmetic. The sumptuary rules are delivered, as if they were the weather report: no sleeves too wide, no hem too bold, no lace that announces a wallet you do not possess. The men like these edicts because they keep markets from intruding on pride. The women bear them because they are used to bearing rules that arrived without consultation. She mends her dress so that modesty and economy wear the same face, then endures the paradox the rules produce. If she looks too plain, suspicion wonders what insolence she is hiding. If she looks too fine, suspicion demands to know the source. Virtue is a narrow bridge with many observers. There are holy women in stories, martyrs and abbesses, whose bodies became arguments in favour of doctrines written by men. Their hair was cut, their beauty hidden their ardour, redirected toward a God who would not bruise them. The village hears their lives as parables. She hears them as weather reports from a country she will never visit. There is a convent 2 days away, where girls vanish into a courtyard and reappear as bells. When the bread fails, a family might test the door of that courtyard with a daughter's name. Sanctuary is expensive, so is marriage, so is hunger. Every choice is a coin minted with a different saint. Sometimes in the afternoon the priest visits houses to inventory souls. He sits on her bench, and reminds the household that the body is a treacherous steward. He means lust. She hears fatigue. He recommends more prayers, and she agrees because there is no polite vocabulary for fewer hours. She pours him ale and watches how the cup teaches his mouth to bless differently. When he leaves, the room expands by a small courage. She will place the good bowl back in its corner and feel briefly that the house has returned to its true shape, a place where the body can decline a philosophy and still be forgiven. The church courts gossip like bees, court lavender. They try to make sweetness out of domestic quarrels, to name who owes whom, what to tether behaviour to doctrine, with knots that will not slip in rain. If a woman calls for redress, she learns that witnesses must be the right height and gender. If she brings other women, the testimony lands softer, as if truth weighed less in certain mouths. She does not misunderstand the lesson. She pivots, as women do, to the jurisdictions that remain the market, on the threshold, the night conversation between friends whose loyalty is older than any seal. Pilgrims pass through the village like weather pilgrims, dust staff, blistered faith. They tell stories about shrines where ailments go to retire. A child's cough leaves a ribbon. A husband's temper leaves a coin. A woman's barrenness leaves a prayer stitched to a hedge. She listens and wonders whether miracles prefer roads to kitchens, crowds to corners. She sends a ribbon anyway with someone else's feet and calls it hope delegated. When the bell rings for the dead, the body is in charge again. Women wash the sheeted form, talk to it the way they talk to bread that will rise better if it thinks it is wanted. The prayers are official, the touch is not. Doctrine escorts a soul. Hands escort matter to its next truth. She feels then that the church knows this part, best dust to dust, with no argument, and that perhaps its certainty about other parts is just a way of practicing for this one. On the walk back from the grave, theology thins, practical mercy thickens. Someone brings soup. Someone else sits without speaking until silence can be trusted not to break. On Marian feasts, the village glows like an idea. Blue banners, votive candles, crowding a ledge with their trembling grammar. Mary is the church's kindest sentence about women, and also its most demanding. Be pure, be generous, be an answer, not a question. The woman lights a wick, and feels the tug of a mother whose power was to agree so completely that the world changed. She wonders what would happen if the church preached a sermon on women who said no at the right time, and whether the right time would be allowed to exist. Evening returns, as it must. She leaves the church with the others and steps back into the street where mud legislates and geese object. Doctrine loosens in the open air. She walks home carrying two liturgies at once. The first is the church's kneel stand, confess, receive, wait. The second is older than sermons, carry, measure, portion, soothe, warn, endure, refuse, when refusal saves more than it costs. These two liturgies do not always quarrel, but when they do, the body decides. It has its own theology. Call it breath, and it is persuasive. By the hearth, she reorders the day a log turned, a pot nudged a child's hair, untangled from the burrs of afternoon. She remembers a line from the Psalms and uses it as a lid on a rising anger. She remembers a line from her mother and uses it as a hinge to close a door gently. The church of the body is here, where warmth is a doctrine no one argues, and kindness is a sacrament with many ministers. She knows what the priest knows, and also what he does not. That salvation is a long labour, and pain can be endured without being worshipped. That the holiest part of her is not her compliance, but her capacity to make a small, stubborn good out of materials unblessed by any book. Night leans against the window. She bends toward the flame and lets it read her face. Tomorrow there will be rules again, and she will follow the ones that protect and edit the ones that do not. The body, which the church fears and blesses, will continue its liturgy: blood, milk, hunger, sleep, touch, breath. She will continue hers to keep the house human in a world that loves ideas more than people. And if she prays before she sleeps, it will be a plain prayer. The walls already know. Grant me strength without spectacle, mercy without permission, and the quiet wit to walk between heaven's orders. and the truth of flesh without losing either. The house has its own pharmacopoeia, a shelf where jars remember summer, bundles of dried plants hung from the rafters like a quiet choir, a mortar that has learned the patience of stone. Knowledge lives here not as theory, but as habit. You reach for mint when a stomach argues for yarrow, when blood will not listen, for willow when a joint rehearses its complaint. The midwife who taught her mother, taught her medicine, is what you can carry in your apron when a road floods and a child burns with a fever that disagrees with prayer. Outside, men discuss humours, blood phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, as if the body were a town council with 4 loud members. Inside, women manage weather more specific. They measure fevers by the sound of a child's whimper name. Pain, by the way. A woman grips a stool, detect infection by a smell that drifts in before words. They do not dismiss humours, they domesticate them. They set a pot singing, and in its steam you can read a minor gospel time, softening a chest, fennel persuading a belly, rosemary reminding a brain that sleep once loved it. Then there is the womb, which in the books moves like a pilgrim. Learned men diagram it with the confidence of mapmakers who have never left their city walls. In their pages, the womb wanders up the spine into the throat, strangling speech until herbs coax it back to duty. They call the trouble hysteria a word that shines like a new coin because no woman minted it. The village repeats the theory as gossip repeats with a rehearsal of certainty. If a wife grows sad in winter or sharp in summer, if her sorrow refuses to wear the right costume, someone will whisper about a restless womb. The woman does not argue with Latin. She argues with symptoms. A neighbour comes pale and vibrating, with a fear no saint will claim. The remedy in books is smoke and perfume sweet resins at the mouth, and bitter ones near the other gate, a coaxing by scent like luring a cat from behind a barrel. The remedy in kitchens is simpler warmth soup, salted with a friend's voice, of the long arithmetic of touch that convinces a shaking body it still belongs to itself. If the womb wanders, it is often because the world has left everything else homeless. There are physicians who visit with portfolios of words and instruments, slender as threats. They take a pulse, read urine, as if it were scripture prescribe a purge or a bleeding. They charge in a currency that announces respect. When they are kind, their kindness gleams like polished brass. You can see yourself in it and not be sure if you approve. When they are not, they dismiss a midwife with a smile that mistakes experience for superstition. Smoke, they say, and leave. Obedience, they say, and leave. Pray, they say, and leave. The women remain with the patient, and remain is often the most healing verb available. Warnings multiply around the body like hedges around a garden. Some are wise. Do not lift alone. Do not sit on cold stones. Do not drink the river's opinion after rain. Some are politics in disguise. Do not meet a friend at dusk. Do not speak louder than a man unless he invites the echo. Do not say no unless you can pay for the distance between the door and the road. Each caution arrives as care and matures into law if repeated enough. The woman learns to sort the warnings, those that keep her alive, from those that keep her small. Menstruation writes its monthly terms without consulting the parish. The church adds margins to the page days of abstinence, purification baths, if mercy and water agree, a suspicion that blood is a liturgy gone rogue. The kitchen offers a counter-liturgy boiled nettle to steady a flood-warmed cloth, pressed against a lower back. Jokes whispered between friends because laughter dilates a room. The way a midwife's hands help a cervix remember its courage. If shame tries to sit at the table, they find it another chair in another house. Pregnancy is both public and a secret. The village notices before a woman speaks. Bread tastes like metal, the morning grows teeth, a belt must negotiate new terms. There are rituals meant to coax fortune knots, tied ribbons, pinned saints, bargained with. There are rules that feel like revenge. Do not look at an eclipse. Do not cross a stream at moonrise. Do not envy. Do not fear. Do not. The woman obeys some because obedience costs little. She edits others because editing is a skill the body teaches the mind when survival is assigned as homework. When miscarriages visit, and they do like storms with no respect for roofs, doctrine clears its throat. Some will say God has chosen differently. Some will say a sin has been weighed and found present. Some will say nothing, and that silence will bruise for years. The body offers its own explanation, complicated and mute. A cell refused to sing. A chord misremembered its task. A chromosome told the wrong story to a room built for listening. The women wrap grief in cloth. Name it aloud. If the church allows, bury it with the speed mercy prefers. Later they bring broth and a joke told badly on purpose, so that laughter must be fetched from a distance and brings appetite back with it. Old remedies carry both cure and risk. Pessaries packed with fat and herbs soften a stubborn passage. Fumigations, juniper, frankincense, storax, thread smoke, upward, as if a message could be carried to an organ like a letter to a distant aunt. Vinegar compresses warm baths, rinses of chamomile. The inventory is long because need is long. There are mistakes, a plant misidentified, a dose remembered from a giant but given to a sparrow. On the worst days, help harms. The women keep their dead on a shelf in the mind where lessons live beside love and try again. Accusation crouches near skill. The more a midwife knows, the more useful her hands, the more the village trusts her, until trust curdles into fear at a funeral, or a rumour leans its ladder against the wrong window. She knew when my child would be born, someone says admiringly in summer. She knew, someone says darkly in winter, what the child would be. Knowledge that saves in June can kill in January if a cow dies on the wrong day. The woman learns to practice medicine as if standing on the thin ice of reputation. Light steps, no sudden movements, no vocabulary that sounds like certainty. At times she is patient and practitioner both. Her own body courts storms. A fever that will not negotiate. A dryness that makes the bed a choreographed wince. A heaviness behind the eyes she cannot pour out with tears though she tries. She prescribes herself the hospital. Women can always afford work. Rearranged to include breath, water, taken seriously. A walk that travels past 2 hedges, and one idea she does not owe anyone. If the village assigns her a wandering womb, she assigns herself a wandering hour in which no one owns her name. Books travel through the parish like dignitaries everyone notices. No one interferes. In one she reads by hearsay, by the mouth of a boy who was allowed to study, that the uterus has horns, that it is a field sown by the male and watered by the female, that the seed must be cooled or heated, depending on which scholar the town currently trusts. She smiles at the agriculture of it. She knows fields. They require tending, yes, but also leaving fallow. They surprise with weeds that turn out to be supper. They obey weather more than opinion. If her body is a field, she is both soil and weather, and the men with pens are clouds that pass. Take care, the elders tell the young wives, and care is a word with so many rooms that you can live in it a decade before realizing none of the doors lead outside. She teaches a different version. Take care of your back, of your laugh, of your coins, of your friendship with the woman who knows where the good water is when the river sulks, of your no, of your yes, of the hour at dusk when the day will try to collect more from you than it paid. Guard that hour like bread. In the evening she inventories her jars. Mint honest as a field, rue bitter as a sermon, sage that smells like old kitchens and good counsel. She pinches a leaf, releases its green advice into the room, and thinks of the daughters in the village girls practicing the apprenticeships of their bodies, without realizing the exam will never end. She decides to keep writing her small, stubborn textbook, this much heat, this many leaves. This word to say to a woman whose breath has shortened from fear. The book has no cover and will never be stored in a chest. It will be carried in aprons in talk, in the choreography of hands that have learned what smoke and soup can do. Night arrives with its slow permission. Somewhere a husband coughs and decides not to be brave. Somewhere a wife ties a ribbon to a bedpost because she has heard knots confuse misfortune. Somewhere a midwife sleeps sitting up in her chair because she was born into a village that measures need in the middle of the night. The womb-faithful organ blamed for every weather rests like any other muscle. The warnings keep watch at the windows. The woman breathes, and in that ordinary sacrament there is a medicine no book has managed to prescribe. Tomorrow she will make more of it. Labour begins like weather you thought would pass. A stagger in the breath while turning the loaf. A tightening that mistakes itself for impatience and then insists. She pauses palms against the table, as if asking wood for a rumour about endurance. Outside the lane practices evening. Geese make their committee sounds. The well holds its breath with everybody else. She calls for no one yet. First there is the private treaty. A woman negotiates with pain you may visit. You may not live here. The message goes out along the old, almost invisible chords. A child's feet sent to run. A neighbour's door knocked with a rhythm that means tonight. A thread of news pulled through the village hem, so it does not tear. The midwife arrives with a bag that looks too small for the miracles it has to carry. She brings the hospital that fits in 2 hands, twine and cloth oil, and needle herbs with names that sound like cousins, a knife whose memory is mostly bread. She also brings the room's new gravity. Work stops being work and becomes waiting with assignments. Beds are negotiable. Sometimes the mother is seated on a stool that teaches the body its own leverage. Sometimes she stands and then folds like a letter into herself. Sometimes she kneels against a chair whose back learns to be a friend. The midwife moves everything 1 palm's length to the right, then back, as if the furniture were notes, and she were arranging a chord that will not jar the hour. She asks for water, which is the same as asking for time. The house's women assemble, called by a bell no tower owns. They arrive with quiet skills, the one whose hands learn a forehead's future, the one who can turn a room's air into reassurance, the one who remembers which prayer does not offend a contraction. There is a small parliament of comforters. Their politics is mercy, their law, the avoidance of fuss. Men hover and are banished hover again, and bring wood show their usefulness by counting things, sticks, knees, reasons to believe. The boundary is porous. Fear leaks through, yet the old custom stands. This is a women's room now governed by breath, supervised by blood, consecrated by urgency. Labour is a liturgy with no homily, only responses. The body calls, she answers. Between pains there are intervals so thin you could thread them and wear them as hope around your neck. The midwife's voice lives there low and factual, the grammar of effort turned into syllables that fit inside clenched teeth. Now, wait, drink, breathe here. Hold me, not the air, me. The mother obeys because obedience here is not politics. It is navigation. She is steering a vessel that is also steering her. Candles multiply as if light were something you could bribe fate with. The room learns to smell of heat and iron and a clean fear that nobody mocks. Between pains, someone rubs her back with oil. Someone else lifts damp hair away from the eyes that keep closing, as if to renegotiate the terms with sleep. The midwife's hands become a clock, you can tell, without looking the sweep of reassurance, the pause, that means listen. The sudden stillness, that means everyone learn to be quiet at once. There is a moment in most births when the house pauses as if the world were tilting toward a decision. It is the hour when the midwife's voice leaves comfort and moves to command. Not yet, she says, or now with the next, or I need the stool or push, as if you were angry at a door. The child crowns like a secret taking public shape. A ring of fire invents new synonyms for faith. The midwife counts backwards from a number no one else can hear. Then the room breaks into two sounds at once, the mother's ragged astonishment, and if mercy is in the air, the new cry, that thin trumpet declaring a body, has entered the grammar of hunger and air. But not always. Some houses learn the other silence. The cry delays the skin, keeps the wrong colour, the cord tells a complicated story around a neck that does not yet know words. The midwife's hands become argument and prayer together. She clears a mouth, coaxes, curses, insists, presses, shakes, begs, in a tone that pretends not to be begging. The baby's first act of obedience, sometimes, is to return. If not, the women carry the mother through those first blank seconds. Before meaning lands a bridge built with bodies and names, and a lie that is not a lie because the heart needs the minutes to catch up. Listen, here, there. When the cry comes late, it is a psalm with smoke in it. When everything goes well, birth is still a border patrol. Blood negotiates exit fees. Skin discovers stitches. The mother learns a choreography that cannot be rehearsed, only endured. The midwife inspects damage like a mason inspecting a wall after a storm. This can be mended with thread, this with rest, this with quiet. The placenta arrives with its own philosophy, sometimes prompt, sometimes stubborn as a debt. If it lingers the room, learns a new kind of attention, and the midwife reaches the distance between knowledge and danger with hands that have crossed it before. A prayer hangs in the corner like a cloak. Nobody wears it yet. There is soup, because soup is how villages say the word safe with a spoon. Someone brings honey and an argument about whether the first drop should touch the baby's tongue. A grandmother counts fingers as if counting were a charm. The cord is tied cut, and the cry changes key from protest to narration. The mother, stunned by the geography her body has mapped, looks at the small proof and constructs a face even if she had sworn she would not. Love is not a decision here. It is a reflex. Fatigue is the nearest saint. And then sometimes death sits down without asking. A hemorrhage writes its red manifesto. A fever arrives with the afternoon and a treacherous confidence. The child's breath conducts a stutter that refuses rhythm. The village knows these chapters too well, and the church has language ready that joins sorrow to sense and cools the joining wisdom. The women have other language instructions, barked gently cool cloths, a ride-warmed stone, for the soles of the feet, a name, said over and over, so the mother remembers which world she is still in. If death will not be argued, they make it civilized. They wash, they wrap, they insist on beauty, because ugliness is not owed even to fate. Between the terror and the relief, the midwife's fees are negotiated with shameless generosity or stinginess, depending on the household's arithmetic and character. Coin appears as if it were a moral. Bread beer, a promised favour in harvest payment, makes itself into many shapes, and the midwife accepts most of them because she is in the business of tomorrow. She will be called again, and the village must be able to afford her. For days the house walks on tiptoe. Newborn sleep colonizes afternoons. Milk recruits the mother into a schedule older than ambition. Her body practices the old paradox. A creature who has just done the work of battle is assigned the work of peace, and told that both should be performed with gratitude. Visitors arrive with advice disguised as sweets. The best ones put their hands in the dishwater and their opinions in their pockets. Some nights, when the baby has decided the moon must be entertained, the mother recalls pieces of labour as if remembering a war from inside a lullaby. Pain returns as image without teeth, the knot in the stool's leg, the taste of a cloth corner, the midwife's wrist smelling of thyme, the precise timbre of a voice that said, "Good, hold that courage." Grief, if grief was invited, by the hour returns as a guest who refuses the chair and sits on the floor, and the women sit with it until even grief grows drowsy. The church visits the threshold with baptism's demand. They bring the child to water, name it, enlist it in the army of the saved. The font is cold and official. The priest's hands are practiced. The candle's flame is the size of a promise a town can keep. The mother stands there with a body that remembers more than doctrine admits and answers questions she is too tired to philosophize. She is grateful to have the village bless what her body has already blessed with labour. In quiet hours she inventories what the night taught her, that the line between living and dying is a kind of thread, and sometimes hands can hold it, and sometimes they cannot. That courage is not loud, it is repetitive. That the midwife's art is not only catching the child, but catching the mother when the room falls away. That women's voices draped low and practical over pain are a form of architecture. They make space where there was not enough. They shore a wall that would have fallen. The child sleeps. The house rests inside its new mathematics. Another mouth, another future. A new reason to count candles. The midwife has already gone to the next door that needs opening. Outside the village, rehearses normalcy hens, litigate carts complain, the river writes its same sentence to a different rock. Inside the mother drowses, with her hand on the small rising and falling of a chest that is writing its own biography in air. If she prays, it is not eloquent. It says, "Let morning come at the speed of mercy. Let my body keep the promises it made. Let the quiet we earn tonight last long enough to become strength." Rumour begins like weather and graduates into law. A cow sickens and stares at a fence post as if reading a verdict. Butter refuses to come under a churn that has never sulked. A child wakes nightly with a dream that chews his voice to threads. Explanations arrive with their sleeves, rolled a fox, a bad batch of milk, a fever learning grammar. But explanations tire and villages do not like unsolved stories. They look around for a hinge on which the tale will swing shut. It is astonishing how often that hinge is a woman who knows things. She is the neighbour whose garden grows as if seeds came to her for confession. She is the midwife who can listen with her hands and tell by a hip's mutter whether a labour will end before dawn. She is the widow who learned the names of plants from a husband who died and from the years that did not. She is the one you visit when your child's cough will not obey. You arrive with a coin you pretend not to have. You leave with a jar and an instruction. Warm it, sing while you do. You praise her in the summer when the jar empties into health. In winter you remember that the same hands can close as well as open. Suspicion does not announce itself as hatred. It arrives as an etiquette of caution. People begin to thank her too loudly, as if gratitude were a shield against debt. Children are warned to shorten their courtesy and lengthen their distance. The priest, who once nodded to her wisdom as one nods to a useful tree, clears his throat before blessing her door. The market that gossip with pockets registers a change in the price of silence. All it takes is a pattern or the impression of one. A glance from her across a lane on Tuesday, a hen dead on Wednesday, a quarrel with a neighbour whose fence has migrated since Michaelmas, a child fevered on Friday, the butter sulking again. Patterns are a luxury of frightened minds. They string events into rosaries and pray to be right. A whispered sentence is promoted to certainty by repetition. She looks too hard at people. She knows when storms come. She told me to boil fennel, and then the pain slept. She told me to boil fennel, and the pain did not. Faith in coincidence is thinner than ice in March. The village holds a meeting. It pretends is not a meeting. Men stand with arms folded. Women twist aprons until the cloth remembers. Stories are offered as evidence, though they were evidence first, and stories later. A travelling peddler supplies vocabulary charms, maleficium of compact devil's mark. The words shine like new coins. They buy fear at a premium. Someone suggests the priest must be consulted. Someone else suggests the bailiff. No one suggests bread and a conversation which is how many trials might be cancelled if courage were a village habit. There are rules, so it is said. If you prick a witch's flesh, it will not bleed where the demon suckles. If you weigh her against a Bible, innocence will be heavy. If you throw her in water, guilt will float, because water rejects what is unnatural. These are not tests. They are rituals for laundering cruelty. The woman who knows things becomes an object for demonstration. Look how the world sorts itself when we assist it. Even those who doubt find themselves assisting. Doubt is impolite when fear has rehearsed its lines this well. Before the tests come the visits. Officials arrive with sanctified questions and unholy certainty. They look like order. They behave like hunger. Whom do you serve? Which nights do you leave your bed? What herb do you speak to? She answers as one answers weather, with endurance and small corrections. I serve my household. I leave my bed to fetch water. I speak to whoever knocks. The officials write anyway, and ink performs its true miracle, turning maybe into must rumour, into record into rule. Neighbours become witnesses because they cannot bear to be anything else. A witness, after all, is not a suspect. They swear to the stubbornness of butter, to the misbehaviour of hens to dreams, in which a cat with human patience watched their baby sleep. One tells how the accused woman once borrowed a coal, and the next day a calf was born, with a tongue like a prayer rug. Another tells how he woke healed after swallowing her bitter tea, and says this in a tone that prevents the court from calling it praise. Gratitude can be an indictment if the room requires one. The woman herself occupies a strange country between outrage and awe. Part of her is furious that knowledge has been rebranded as venom, that the jars she filled with summer have been renamed coffins. Part of her is astonished at the village's need for magic, for the comforting logic in which every misfortune has an author you can point at. She remembers births caught in rooms, where men lacked the grammar for mercy and women invented it. She remembers a night when she placed a coin in a palm she pretended was steady. She remembers the priest's voice softened by ale and winter. She is not naive about the arithmetic of belonging. She did not expect to be its remainder. Sometimes there is a child who will not lie. Before officials and heaven, the child shakes his head and tells the truth as children do with more accuracy than diplomacy. She gave me honey when I was sick. She mended my doll's arm. She laughed when I fell, and then picked me up, and the laugh helped more. The room shifts uneasily. Mercy is inconvenient in courts that specialize in clarity. The bailiff thanks the child, which is the polite form of dismissal. The clerk writes a note that will not be read. There are trials where philosophy is paraded under the name of law. Learned men speak of demons as if speaking of taxes, inevitable, measurable, an index of civic failure. They cite authorities who have never churned butter or sat at the edge of a sickbed through 3 unprofessional dawns. The accused listens, as if to rain it will fall, whether she attends or not, but attendance at least tells you when to pull in the laundry. Her advocate, if she has one, offers that skill and malice have different signatures. He is nodded at and filed under nuance. Nuance is not welcome when the village wants a clean floor. If ordeal is chosen, the river is conscripted. The crowd follows the officials to the bank, and the bank performs its old sheepdog duty, keeping people from raw water. The woman is bound in a manner described as fair. Prayers are said because people believe God enjoys a show and will adjust physics to suit the moral. She looks at the curve of the current measures, the gossip of reeds, and thinks absurdly of laundry. When they cast her in the village, waits to see whether nature will embrace her or spit her out. Nature, like courts, is frequently misquoted. She floats because lungs remember their task, or sinks because wool remembers its lesson, and the verdict is imposed whichever way the body chooses. There are places where mercy survives this theatre. A husband remembering a winter she warmed with one clever stew steps forward. A priest frightened by the sound of his own certainty stammers. A neighbour places herself between rope and wrist. In such stories, a village recalls that safety is a shared profession. In others, the rope completes its sentence, and the woman's knowledge is redistributed as if jars could be emptied into hands by law. The midwife inherits the garden. The widow's herbs are seized and renamed contraband. Nothing in the village heals faster than hypocrisy. Meanwhile, illness continues its ancient career. Butter sulks for reasons entirely its own. Children dream because brains do. Cows die because grass-like justice has moods. Eventually, the village tires of vigilance. It no longer sees hoofprints pointing directly at the devil. The season changes. Guilt goes out of fashion. People begin to speak the accused woman's name again, without tasting metal. In some households, her memory becomes a cautionary proverb. In others, it becomes a prayer that does not involve any saints. What remains a scar where fear proved it could be organized? A row of jars in another woman's kitchen, labelled more quietly. A midwife who learns to say perhaps in a dozen reassuring ways. A priest who preaches Eve and Mary with less geometry. A child grown now. A mother who teaches her own child the difference between power and help. The village keeps its talent for patterns, but uses it on the sky. The woman, if she survives, lives smaller. She edits her kindness into safer fonts, fewer predictions, more suggestions, fewer cures, more soups. She lets her garden go a little wild, so that abundance will not advertise. She does not stop knowing, but she stops letting knowledge answer to its full name in public. If she did not survive, her house becomes a lesson shaped like a door. People walk through glance at the hooks where her apron used to hang, and for a moment remember how quickly hours can be turned into it. Night comes, and the river rehearses its indifference under a sky that has never been consulted by courts. Somewhere, a child wheezes and is eased by steam and time. Somewhere, a midwife ties a knot and whispers to courage in a dialect only bodies understand. Somewhere, a man who testified turns in sleep and becomes briefly defencelessly honest. In the morning, bread will rise because yeast wants to, and the village will behave as if its goodness were a permanent fixture. But on certain winter evenings, when the butter is obstinate and the wind makes old shutters pronounce judgment, someone will speak her name softly, not as accusation, not as praise, but as weather, something that once passed through and proved. Everyone's roofs. Winter is kind to footprints and cruel to names. On a street where the snow remembers better than the parish book, a woman in black passes like a comma in a sentence no one wants to finish. Widow is the word the village uses when a household becomes a question. It sounds like weather and reads like arithmetic. One wage gone, one pair of hands, missing one bed that cools too fast. Condolence arrives as bread, suspicion arrives as advice. You must be careful now, people say, meaning be smaller. Grief obeys, because grief is polite, but hunger is not. The law loves clean categories. A wife belongs, a maiden belongs to someone who intends to prove it. A widow belongs to no one, which makes officials itch. Paper steps in where a husband used to stand. There is the matter of the dowry's return of debts that suddenly remember themselves of cousins who begin their sentences with only fare and end them with furniture. The widow learns to speak clerk, which is related to prayer but costs more. She keeps a ledger of favours on the inside of her cheek where it will not be read in court. There are grades of loneliness. The first is loud and has visitors. It brings pans that smell of borrowed time and stories told too brightly. The second is neat and bureaucratic signatures. Seals a man who pronounces usufruct as if it were mercy. The third is the one the house whispers, when everyone has gone how to move the ladder, without waking the child, how to lift a bucket, that now weighs the difference between charity and independence. The widow who once triaged a day by meals and moods, now triages it by coins and whether the market keeps her name in the softer drawer. Widow's work has its own curriculum. She learns which seams hold when a sleeve is turned again, which hens will tolerate a rearranged pecking order, which merchants will extend credit to a face that does not carry a husband's shadow. She perfects the art of reciprocal pity, taking a neighbour's washing to be seen, returning it neatly to be remembered, offering advice rarely and at the right temperature. Men speak to her with the careful grammar reserved for unlocked doors. She answers in sentences that wear coats. The village knows two kinds of female holiness, the married sort that breeds patience, and the walled sort that breeds songs. Between them lives the widow sufficiency mistaken for scandal resilience for conspiracy. If she laughs too soon, the calendar clucks. If she does not laugh at all, charity tires. She is told to join the world and also to leave it alone. She sets her jaw to the middle and survives there a diplomat representing a country of one. There is another door for women who wish to step out of the weather entirely. The convent puts a border around time and calls it peace. Girls enter with trausius of linen and fear. Widows enter with a handful of winter and a fatigue that wants a rule to rest in. The turning of the key is both promise and sentence. Outside hunger legislates, inside bells do. The hours acquire grooves, matin's lord's prime. The ladder of sound that trains the day to climb without incident. The nuns live in a grammar that reduces pronouns. I becomes we, mine becomes ours. Desire becomes discipline, practiced, until it wears the face of ease. The work is ordinary, and therefore sacred gardens that refuse to gossip, looms that rearrange thread into patience kitchens that produce the same good answer to the same decent question. The cloister teaches women what the parish never bothered to that space can be loyal. Some sisters come to God by theology, some by exhaustion, some by the simple physics of a wall that does not move when a man shouts. A convent is not airless. It hums with the traffic of words. Psalms are chewed to sweetness. Marginalia bloom in books like gardens, running away from their borders. A scribe copies a homily with a hand both obedient and sly. Into a capital letter she tucks a fox or a woman laughing, or a flower that refuses the colour assigned. Infirmarians learn a medicine less theatrical than the physician's broths. Poultices, a chair pulled near, so loneliness can sit down before it harms anything important. One sister sings without being told, and her voice softens stone. But the wall has a mind. Enclosure is a mercy and a gamble. It keeps out what bruises, it keeps in what festers. A superior with a small soul can enlarge it by rule. A chaplain with a large appetite can rehearse sermons about humility that taste of hunger. Widows who chose God for shelter find him mostly in the work dirt under nails, a pot that permits a second bowl, a small herb garden that pretends to be an answer. At night, when the wind argues with shutters, the sisters trade histories in whispers the husband who did not know how to be gentle, the son conscripted by plague, the village that asked a question with a rope. The confessional cannot hold such stories, the dormitory can. Between village and convent runs the narrow path of those who do not fit either narrative. Solitary women beguines in cities that permit them anchoresses in cells the size of a doctrine. The beguine borrows neither a husband nor a rule. She works, she prays, she tends the poor and the town gossips, as if she were a paragraph that refuses punctuation. Authorities squint. Freedom without supervision is an offence against paperwork, yet beginnage persists, where economy and piety shake hands a republic of useful women, pretending not to notice that freedom has chosen their courtyard. Anchoresses choose a radical solution to be held still so that the world can move around them with less panic. A cell is built against a church wall, a window open to the altar for the Eucharist, another to the street for counsel. A rite buries the woman alive to everything except her vow. It sounds like madness until one sees the queue, wives, widows, men who suspect their conscience wants a witness, children who wish to be told they are forgiven for breaking what cannot be mended. The anchoress listens and becomes an oracle of plain sense. She does not escape the village, she anchors it. Outcasts have many uniforms. Some wear poverty, like a badge they did not apply for. Some wear beauty, past the date the parish finds useful. Some wear cleverness that refuses to hide. A unmarried mother walks the margin between scandal and necessity. A woman rumoured to have too much reading creeps through sentences the way a fox creeps through hedges seen disapproved of, impossible to catch. They form a loose fraternity without meetings. Their password is competence. Their creed a vow to cause as little harm as possible with the sharp tools the world has left lying around. Every so often, a widow becomes a node, a place where help collects. She is careful not to choose too loudly whom she helps. Partiality is a luxury assigned to men. She lends pots and hours, and the sort of courage that can be borrowed without needing to be returned all at once. She refuses to speak ill, not because she is saintly, but because slander is labour, and she has better chores. When she slips a heel of bread to a child who has been told to wait until supper, charity briefly remembers its original language. What these women share behind walls beside wells in cells, the size of a hope, is a habit of making room. The widow makes room in a house that no longer adds up. The nun makes room in a schedule for a mercy that was not on the board. The outcast makes room in a sentence for a name the village avoids. They are experts in square inches of table of time, of breath. History wants victories. They produce continuities. The village's survival depends on both and praises only one. On the night the wind scrapes the roofs with its old spoon, the widow bars her door and sits with her mending the thread, following a path that refuses despair. In the convent, Compline lifts its simple cup of sound and pours it over the day. In a cell that smells of wax and stone, the anchoress hears a boy confess to stealing an egg and tells him to plant a tree. The outcast woman, who owns more recipes than friends, stirs a pot and adds one more pinch than thrift recommends. In the morning their work will have no heralds. It will, however, have neighbours, and that, for a world held together by silent stitches, is triumph enough. Revolutions are often measured in drums. This one is measured in teaspoons. Not the violent tilt of a kingdom, but the steady tilt of a pot, so the last ladle finds the bowl that needs it most. The village will never call it resistance. It calls it help custom what women do. The words are the camouflage that lets courage pass through gates without paying a toll. It begins in the small jurisdictions where power forgets to patrol. A threshold, for instance. 2 women standing half in half out the house, behind them breathing laundry and soup, the lane in front of them rehearsing gossip. They trade recipes and information disguised as gossip. They trade gossip disguised as warning. If the reeve comes on Thursday, weigh your grain on Wednesday. The priest is in a merciful mood if you let him finish his story about the monastery he almost joined. Boil the nettle twice. The second water is for anger. Each sentence edits the map by a thumb's width, moving a danger from here to there, enough to walk around it. Writing happens where no clerk would look in the margins of a receipt on the inside of a breadcloth in a child's lesson where the letters double as a record of who can be trusted to carry a message to the miller without tasting it. A girl learns to copy a psalm so neatly that an extra line can hide inside the capitals "Meet at dusk by the fallen oak." A boy who will be a man before he understands which laws he has already obeyed brings home a scrap from the scribe's floor. His mother reads its inked weather and discovers the price of salt is about to rise. She buys early, and 3 neighbours do too, because foresight is a commons when practised properly. The market is a theatre, resistance works the aisles. A woman with eggs refuses a high price loudly, so the woman 2 stalls down may accept a fair one quietly. Another miscounts on purpose, letting a widow's basket come up heavy, and scolds herself with professional flair, so no one will accuse charity of collusion. When a bailiff loiters near the fishmonger hands, fold cabbage leaves over news, the tanner's boy is being questioned. A cabbage is a decent envelope. If questioned later, the mouth can swear it spoke only of supper. Education that guarded garden receives visitors at night. There is always a candle somewhere after Compline. A woman who once smuggled her own letters through a husband's carelessness gathers 2 girls at a table scrubbed to honesty. They learn to sign their names, to add and subtract, without moving their lips to read the first chapter of Luke until the words stop being church-owned and become usable, fear not. Another night, the same table teaches a boy how to write a receipt that cannot be massaged by a dishonest merchant. No one calls it a school. School would require permission. They call it mending. There is music that never reaches the church, work songs that pace the back-breaking hours, lullabies that carry instructions inside their rhyme. Hush now, hush, keep flour dry, keep tinder high. Sleep, sleep, hide your coin where rafters meet. Children memorize safety while dreaming, and later, when danger arrives with official vocabulary, a tune goes off in the mind like a lantern lit in a storm. Here, here, the latch, here, here, the key. Herbs become passwords. Not the jars, those are ordinary honourable, the village's pharmacy, but the way a sprig is set beside the door or a wreath is tilted on a peg. Rue turned upside down means I cannot host you. Rosemary over the lintel asks for watchful eyes. Time at the window promises soup to whoever needs it badly enough to knock with the bruised knuckles of pride. When a woman is in trouble she cannot name, she ties a red thread in her kerchief. Those who know nod and come by for a cup of water, which arrives with counsel a place to sleep, and the fierce miracle of someone believing her story without improving it. The Ledger of Favours is a book with 2 covers, one visible, one invisible. Publicly debts a square, a borrowed tool returned, a sack carried a pig, kept from wandering into doctrine. Privately, the math grows subtler. You stand between a man's temper and his child, and call yourself clumsy so the blow lands on wood. You share a Saint's Day cake with the wife, whose cupboard has only its good manners left. You lend your voice at confession's edge. Father, I was there. She speaks truth, knowing the priest's pen is lighter in company. The village remembers such arithmetic incorrectly, but it remembers. Reputation, carefully tended, becomes a currency women spend on one another. Sometimes resistance requires an audience with its own courage. The women assemble, not as a guild, no parchments, no dues, but as a weather system. They arrive with sewing, with excuses, with the dignity of people prepared to mind their own business, except for this once. A girl's dowry has been miscounted. They count it again out loud in a chorus that makes the numbers behave. A widow's rent has been raised without reason. 10 purses produce 10 coins that travel like a blessing, delivered by multiple hands, so no single woman can be accused of generosity. Fear cannot find a single throat to close around. In hard seasons, plague-bad harvest, the long theology of winter quiet resistance widens into a doctrine. Households braid themselves. One bakes, one mends, one watches children, one stands in the breadline, with 4 names in her mouth and a face that invites no questions. The art is to make survival look like routine. If you are asked why that child wears boots he didn't own yesterday, you say, because feet are facts, and then laugh, so the conversation remembers to be harmless. There are letters to the dead. Not written exactly, but spoken in rooms that smell of wax and boiled cloth. A mother who lost a baby sits with another in labour and tells the absent child, "Lend your luck." A wife whose husband returned from the river asks the river for its better self. These prayers are not doctrine, they are engineering. They bridge the gap between despair and utility, letting a shaken hand do the next necessary thing. The church, if it overheard, would call it superstition. The women call it what works. Not all quiet is gentle. There is also the resistance of refusal, the no delivered without flourish, the door not opened the piece of news, not carried the silence installed, where a rumour tries to rent space. When a man mouths a joke that requires women to be the furniture of its punchline, the room discovers it does not laugh. Laughter is a lever. It can lift or crush. Deciding not to join is a politics that leaves no paper trail and weakens a tyrant the way drought weakens a tree, from the small roots first. And there are records. The secret books. Not grimoires, those attract the wrong readers, but practical archives, lists of good midwives, and dangerous wells of men who can be trusted with a child, and men who can only be trusted with a task of priests whose absolutions travel farther than their gossip. In one house, a sister keeps a calendar marked not with feasts, but with safety market days, when crowds can hide a visit to a friend, Saints' Eves, when men drink and therefore do not notice women rearranging the future. The children learn what is necessary and what no longer is. They are trained to carry water and also trained to carry stories who refused to burn a herb woman who returned a dowry after an argument, who gave a loaf without ringing the size of his charity like a bell. There is prestige in this pantheon that the official one cannot match. The saints in these stories have ovens and cracked thumbs. Their miracles are measurable. A bruise that did not mature, a hunger that was cancelled, a marriage that learned a softer vocabulary. In the end, the village believes it has governed itself by law and sermon. Law and sermon help, they also forget. What remembers are the hands. The quiet resistance shapes days into shelter, sorrow into soup, fear into a plan that can be explained to a child. It never asks for statues, it asks for tomorrow. If there is an anthem, it is a hum in the throat while work proceeds. If there is a banner, it is a line of washing, catching wind like a parable. Night throttles down the lane, doors close. A lamp burns where lessons are being lent to the future. Somewhere a widow places a coin beneath a loose board, and in the same motion leaves a second coin for another widow who will know where to look. Somewhere a girl copies the alphabet until it becomes a ladder. Somewhere a boy coached by a mother who refuses to raise another careless man learns to apologize and means it. The house breathes. The resistance, which is only another word for neighborliness taken seriously, breathes with it. Tomorrow the story will continue under a different name: kindness, thrift, prudence, luck. But those who practice it will know what it is. They will know because of how their shoulders drop when a knock at dusk proves to be a friend, because of how bread tastes when it is shared without accounting, because of how the mind settles when a plan, however small, has been made. They will sleep not triumphantly, but well enough to try again. And in the ledger, no clerk keeps the sum, will show the world held a little where it might have broken. The village sleeps in its usual arrangements, one half dreaming of work already done, the other half rehearsing tomorrow's work. The moon travels its ordinary patrol, though tonight it feels like an archivist moving through shelves of thatch and slate checking what remains. Through every shutter's crack it spills the same pale mercy. It does not distinguish between priest and widow, between the girl who still believes and the woman who learned belief must be folded into practice. It blesses impartially, and that is its genius. Inside the houses, the stories sit where the day left them. A cradle sways faintly under the sigh of a mother who has forgotten she is singing. On a windowsill, a pot of rosemary leans toward the cold as if scent could be an argument against frost. In the church, candles burn themselves thinner, carrying their petitions upward in cursive smoke. The bells have done their work. Now they sleep two hands folded in the tower. The world looks finished, but it never is. The woman who has been our witness, sometimes mother, sometimes midwife, sometimes widow, or witch, or sister, sits by her own hearth and watches the flame talk to itself. She thinks of the centuries behind her, not as dates, but as the slow respiration of endurance. Her foremothers worked this same hour, turning wool, minding embers, saving scraps for broth, holding a child against a chest that would not stop worrying, even when the worry was spent. History is a long apprenticeship in staying. Outside, winter rehearses its authority. The wind collects gossip from roofs. The stars keep their appointments. Somewhere an owl patrols the grammar of night. The woman listens to all of it and feels the quietness not as absence but as balance. She has no taste for heroics, only for continuity, the fragile kind that depends on soup, on habit, on people who still remember which door to knock on when the weather misbehaves. Empires rise on a diet of thunder. Survival prefers whispers. She opens the small book she keeps, not of scripture, though it borrows its cadence, but of observations. She writes by firelight her letters, patient as footsteps. Today I mended a neighbour's sleeve. It will hold. The hens are restless. The well has gone brackish. The child next door has new freckles. The sky keeps threatening change, but ends in courtesy. These are not the entries of a chronicler. They are a ledger of presence. The world will not ask for this record, but it will be stronger for existing. She remembers others who wrote in their own languages of endurance. The nun who illuminated psalms until her wrists ached and hid a smile in the margin. The widow who paid rent with laughter and still owed less than the landlord. The midwife who could tell a lie kindly enough to keep someone alive. The girl who once asked too many questions and learned to turn them into songs. The world was never short of witnesses, it was only short of ink. On some nights, she imagines those other women leaning out of time, as one might lean from a balcony. They share the same astonishment that they are remembered even faintly, that their work, which was supposed to vanish like breath, can still be felt on the skin of the present. She does not pray to them exactly. She acknowledges them the way one acknowledges the ground quietly, with weight. The candle lists almost spent. Wax pools like surrender. She feels the ache of the day in her fingers and accepts it as evidence of use. Outside the moon climbs higher, a patient overseer of human comedy. It has seen all of this before: the bargains and betrayals, the births, the whispered revolutions disguised as chores. It will see them again in other centuries, wearing different clothes, but repeating the same verbs: carry, mend, soothe, hide, hope. She stands and opens the shutter. The cold steps in politely. The night is clear, the kind that makes distance seem like something you could fold. The roofs glitter with a frost that has decided to be generous. In that stillness, she realizes that nothing has ever been silent. It only waits for someone to hear it correctly. Even now, the snow has its own commentary. The river, its own archive. The sky, its own book of marginal notes. Tomorrow she will wake, stir the ashes, pour water into the same jug, teach the same small courtesies to the same impatient children. There will be errands and gossip, and the mild ache of endurance continuing its apprenticeship. No one will call it history. But the moon still moving above her will recognize the pattern and mark it in its secret account. The light loaned, the life carried, the faith practiced without spectacle. She closes the shutter, keeping a sliver of brightness trapped inside like a bookmark. The room sighs, the house resets its rhythm. Before she sleeps, she whispers what might be a prayer or a report. She cannot tell the difference anymore. Let what was hard become useful. Let what was broken become story. Let those who come after find the road we made with our hands and know by the light that finds them that we were here. Outside, the moon listens as it always has and answers with silence, which is not emptiness but assent.